All right, everybody, welcome and thank you so much for giving us your time to come learn about wireless risks, as well as the risks on the social and emotional development of our children and what we can do to start learning to use technology more safely. I want to welcome you all, and it's so nice to see some familiar faces here as well as some new faces. Janet Johnson, we've missed you. I haven't seen you in so long, but it's so nice to see you in front of a screen again. Dr. Magda Havas, your work has been so instrumental in everything that I've learned along the way, and we are honored to have you here from Canada. And Laurie Wodin and Sherry Champagne have stepped up to become champions in the pilot program that we've just begun this fall. And our hope is that in 2025, we will educate citizens around us in our own communities and get them well enough informed that they feel comfortable going to speak to the schools about this. So welcome everybody, and we will go ahead and get started. I want to give a shout out to Laurie Wodin, who tonight is my co-host, and she, let me make sure I've given her co-host privileges here. Whoops, hang on, bear with me. Something just went funny. Laurie, if you want to let Margaret in, thank you.
Yep, she's all set.
Okay. I'm going to go ahead and spotlight Laurie. She is in Upton, Massachusetts, and she has just been so incredibly active in her community and such an inspiration to me. She's 1 or 2 towns over from me, and I just so appreciate having her here with us tonight. She'll be the Wizard of Oz behind the curtain there, running the show while I give my presentation. But I'd like Laurie to say hello and how she got involved in EMF work and what she's up to these days.
Hi, so as Cece said, I'm from Upton, and about 5 years ago, coming up on 5 years ago, I became electrically sensitive through a sort of electrical hub I made here with my computer, and I became part of a closed circuit. And since then, I've been electrically sensitive. So luckily, I had very good practitioners who knew what this was. And it wasn't long before I came across Cece, so I was very grateful about that. I had been a library media tech teacher in Hopedale, but everything was wired in those days. So I didn't have any symptoms at that time, but I was, very involved with technology and always had been. And now I was in a situation where I could barely use a phone or a computer, so it was difficult. Um, so how we began here was I looked at the wireless bylaw in Upton and I noticed it hadn't been updated in 10 years. And so, of course, it didn't include any kind of technology that was related to small cell antennas. It only had large towers. And so I went to the planning board and said, don't you think we should update this bylaw? And what they said is in our town, citizens update bylaws and they bring them to us. So they kind of authorized me to begin to working on what could be a bylaw for our town. And we've worked on it for a long time. Our first go round, we weren't able to get it done in time, so we tried to get a pause on any installations until the FCC responded to the legal order that they had to look at the aggregate effects on children, effects on the environment. And we didn't get the 2/3 for the bylaw, but we got a commanding majority. So that sort of showed my town that there was a lot of interest and safety around this and keeping these away from homes. So we continued to work. They put me together with the tech committee, who has very different goals from, I'm part of a group called Sustainable Upton in town. So we're about health and safety, and they're about technology. So it's a little bit like health agencies versus the FCC. But we've worked together, and we finally, just in November, got the bylaw passed. The bylaw just sort of lays out a little bit about small cell antennas and refers to a policy that we're still working on. So we're still trying to get a setback from homes, a distance between small cell antennas, and maybe a proof of need of a gap in service. So those are the things we're working on. And if anybody here has any input from me, I would welcome it. And then because we were working on this bylaw, it gave me an opportunity to bring Cece into Upton, and she did 2 talks to educate people about the concerns about wireless technology. And that was how we got so many people to vote with us, because she makes such a impressive case. People understand right away from hearing her talk what the problems are. And so we have a good contingent of people who are concerned. And as I said, we got the bylaw all set. We also did a Generation Zapped showing in town too. And then, since that time that the bylaw is kind of on its way and we're just finishing up the policy, Cece asked if I would become involved with the schools effort. I'd like to have our schools wired. I had the feeling that all the technology that used to be in the ceilings of classrooms and labs was still there. I'm finding out that may not be the case, and it may be a little harder to wire than we had originally thought, but we're working very hard at it. And I've got school committee people on our side and others listening, so we're hopeful that we'll be able to maybe get a school or two wired, because it would be great if we could get a couple schools to be models for how really maybe difficult it's not. Maybe it's easy to do. And I just spent 2 days in my local high school and I could feel in my body how aggravated it was from the technology in certain rooms that I was in. And so now I have a way to take my meter in, which I got through this grant because of being on this schools group. I can take it in and I can show them where there are high readings, and we can begin to work on trying to get the schools either to lower the beacon signals so it's less harmful to kids, or to get them fully wired. And that's our goal. So that's it.
Laurie, I am just so excited for what's to come in 2025 because you have done such incredible work. And we're very, very grateful for you leading the way because we all get there on different paths and you have just been successful. And if I understand correctly, you just got a radio frequency detection meter for your local library as well. Is that right?
We have a library of things and it's on order. I don't know if it's come in yet. We got the indoor air quality monitor and they have it on the list to get this very same meter, the Safe and Sound Pro 2, in our library thing so people can borrow it in town from our library.
All right. Well, for folks who don't understand a lot of what Laurie just said, we're going to go through some of the basics tonight. And I'm going to go ahead and do a screen share in just a moment. And please know that we will be sending out not only the recording, but my slides as well, so that anybody who wants to do the deeper dive into whatever areas interest them most are welcome to do that. And if my slides can help you start that journey, then we're very honored to do so. All right, Laurie, I'm going to go ahead and remove you from the spotlight, and I'm going to do a screen share to bring up my slides. Okay, Laurie, can you give me a nod if you can see my slides?
I can see it. And can I mention that I'm going to monitor the chat. So if people have questions, they should feel free to write them and we'll get to them at the end.
Excellent. Thank you for that. Yeah, we like to keep the chat relatively quiet. Otherwise, people may go off on a tangent and it's going to be a distraction to those who are trying to listen to the presentation. So feel free to pop questions in and we will also open up for Q&A at the end. Okay, so here we go. I have titled tonight's talk, Parenting and Schooling in the Digital Age, because there's a lot that's happening right now that parents are starting to realize that something is just not right, giving our children this unfettered access to technology and for ourselves. So again, thank you to Laurie Wodin for being our co-host here. She is part of a group called Sustainable Upton, and it's the group of citizens in her town that are working on sustainability solutions. So your town may have a group like that too, that you could bring this topic to as well. So I'm Cece Doucette. I'm the director of Massachusetts for Safe Technolology, and that MTPW after my name just means that I have the privilege of earning a master's in technical and professional writing from Northeastern University. And never in a million years did I imagine that that's what I would be doing with that degree or my bachelor's in communication. But I'm very grateful for that skill set that I am, it's my happy place to be teaching people what these risks are and what we can do about them. So I got involved in this back in, I want to say like 2012, 2013, after I had run many campaigns in my local school district when my kids were in school we kept hearing about this 21st century classroom and how our kids were going to need to have access to all this new technology to succeed in the world. And we're a small town here in Ashland, Massachusetts, and we certainly did not have budget for any of this. So, good to be parents. We jumped in and started doing fundraising to get wireless infrastructure and then to get all the accoutrements, the iPads and the Chromebooks and the smart boards and the minis, and all what we thought was going to give our kids a leg up in the world. And then right around 2013, maybe, a friend of mine who's an electrical engineer tipped me off that there are biological effects to using wireless technology. And so being a tech writer, I just thought, I wonder if there's any science to this. And so I started looking, and I was astounded that you don't even have to look far. You just need to know to look. And you will find literally thousands of peer-reviewed published studies all over the world, the majority of which are establishing that there is very significant biological harm happening. And we'll go through the science with you tonight. So I started raising my hand with my schools, and almost everybody was in the same boat as me. We had no idea. But as we started sharing the science, we ultimately became the first public school district in the United States back in 2014, so a whole decade ago, to even have this little sign hanging in our classrooms with best practices for mobile devices, which advise to turn off everything when you're not using it and only turn the Wi-Fi on for the short amount of time that you actually need it. And always place the mobile device on a solid surface, not on your body. And we're going to go through some legal fine print in our devices in a minute that explain why that is. So when I realized this was just a sign in our schools and they weren't doing anything meaningful, they were waiting for higher authorities to guide them on what to do. I worked with my state senator, Karen Spilka, who's now our Senate president, to introduce legislation in Massachusetts. And I was advised that the legislation should just form a commission that would bring the right minds together at the state level and look at this issue and decide what to do. And so I thought, well, that sounds good. And it's now been 10 years since we introduced our first commission bill here in Massachusetts. And although we've worked very hard to get it out of the first committee, it then goes to the next committee where it just times out at the end of the session. But there is a constituent in New Hampshire, Deb Hodgson, who's a retired accountant. She got really sick and figured out ultimately that it was the Wi-Fi in her house that was taking her down with a myriad health complaints. And so she started working with her legislators, and her state representative drove her down to my house here in Massachusetts. Now, Representative Patrick Abrami from New Hampshire was an engineer, and he'd only been taught that you have to have heat from a device to have harm. And then he starts seeing all this science that we're going to teach you about, where it's not about the heat. It's about this spiked erratic pulse of two-way radio frequency microwave radiation that's sending our signals and data back and forth. And it's really disruptive to our own biology. So they came down to my house. We helped him to connect the dots further. And then we helped him to get a law passed in New Hampshire. And we're going to tell you a little bit more about that as well. And then, folks, can I ask you to please mute if you're not speaking? We're getting a little bit of feedback in the background. Thank you. So, Marlene, can you please mute? So then somebody over in Europe was figuring all this out and had reached out to Dr. Deborah Davis, who is now the President Emeritus of the Environmental Health Trust, which is arguably the world's greatest think tank and database on this topic. And they wanted permission to reference her database in this online course that they were building. And she gave them permission and said, you might also want to connect with this woman, Cece Doucette in Massachusetts, because she's making some inroads with her schools and with her legislature. So I wound up volunteering my time, and now we have this online course that can be completed in less than an hour for less than the cost of a movie ticket. We can literally mass train your town, your schools, your workforce. And you know, when I fell down the rabbit hole more than a decade ago, we had so few resources that we could just tap right into. So today I'm excited to share with you that we have a ton of resources right at our fingertips, that once we pluck up the courage to start doing something about this, we've got really good things that will help us to get there. And then I went down to the State House for this international forum that had come to ask for right to know legislation. And for 2 years, I was the only person I knew who could talk about this issue. And honestly, I wasn't even really sure back then what it was that I was on to. So it was so gratifying to go to our State House and connect with like a standing room only group of people at the Massachusetts State House coming to listen to these world-leading experts. Dr. Deborah Davis from the Environmental Health Trust organized this, and she brought with her one of the leading scientists out of India's government, Dr. R.S. Sharma, who had done some of the sperm studies that show this is very harmful. And she also brought with her Frank Clegg, who is the retired president of Microsoft Canada. And Dr. Havas, who's with us today, she had connected with Frank Clegg and brought him the science and showed him what this radiation looks like and helped him to begin his journey. And he came to our State House to say, yeah, I've met with a dozen experts in, you know, the world, leading experts, and our Federal Communications Commission's guidelines are not safe. Canada's Safety Code 6 guidelines or standards are not safe. So I'm sitting there, you know, kind of like a kid in a candy store. For 2 years, I had nobody I could talk to about this. And now I'm sitting in the same room with world-leading scientists and a captain of industry who's telling us this is not safe. So from there, I was able to connect with a number of other people across Massachusetts, and we formed Massachusetts for Safe Technology. So I built this website out. A nurse who had learned about this at a neuro conference, a brain conference, she gave me $1,000 grant to build out my website. And so I've tried to put information that will help others quickly come up to speed on this issue. Marlene, can you please mute?
Hope is also one way, right?
Or Laurie, if you could click on Marlene, that will give you the option to mute her. Thank you. So somewhere along the line, somebody found my work down at the National Institutes of Health and asked me to co-chair this technology panel for the Health in Buildings Roundtable Conference. And this was a gathering of experts from all over our country. And we had doctors, we had scientists, we had government agencies, we had the green organizations, we had hospitals and urban planners and architects, all coming together to talk about how to make our buildings healthy indoors. And for most, this was the first time they were hearing about wireless radiation impacts. So I like to share this link. If you're looking for something that's highly credible and quick to digest, we were all held to 8 or 10 minutes to give our talk. So I gave the opening remarks, and then Frank Clegg from Microsoft Canada flew in on his own time and dime. We had another one of the world leading scientists, Dr. Martin Paul, and he came and explained all the mechanisms of harm that are, you know, happening in our body when we're exposed to this pulsation of man-made radiation. And we had Theodora Scarato, who's the Executive Director Emeritus of the Environmental Health Trust, and she talked about what other countries are already doing to protect their children and their citizens and their environment. Because we have industry very powerful here in the United States, we're kind of behind the 8 ball. We are not doing what we need to do to protect our children and our environment. And then another gentleman that was kind to join my panel was Peter Sullivan from Silicon Valley. Now, Peter had been a fighter pilot back in his younger days, you know, kind of like Top Gun. So he's up there with the natural, really high level of electromagnetic fields in a fighter plane that has radar mounted all over the plane. And that's what this technology is. It came out of our military for warfare. So the radar, the natural high level, EMFs, and then inside the cockpit, he's got all this other instrumentation to be communicating back to the ground. So Peter got very highly exposed to these natural and man-made electromagnetic fields. And Peter's health eventually started crashing. Now, when he left the service, he went to work for Silicon Valley as an engineer. It was like his friends who invented cell phones and other technologies that we've come to adopt today. So he started losing an unhealthy amount of weight. His teeth started getting brittle and he was suffering all these other symptoms. And when he did his research, he realized it was microwave radiation sickness or electromagnetic radiation syndrome. And so Peter had two sons, and when each of his little boys came up through the preschool years, they both wound up on the autism spectrum. And I came across a lecture that Peter had given online, and he said after figuring out autism to the best of his ability, he went and removed as much of the chemical exposures from his family's diet and environment as he could. He went so far as to do the heavy metal detox to pull a lot of those toxins that had, settled into our brains and other organs. And then he said what I would recommend as a first line of defense today is to do the digital detox. And so he recommends that families remove all of the wireless from the home for at least 12 hours at night so that the body can do proper cell repair and recovery during our sleep. And Peter actually said that his two sons are now grown men. They both successfully went through college and they're contributing members of society today. And neither one of his sons are on the autism spectrum any longer. And I went, whoa. I didn't even know that was an option, but apparently there's something called de novo mutations, which means it didn't come from mom's bloodline. It didn't come from dad's. It came from somewhere in the environment. So if we can kind of peel back the onion and get rid of these environmental exposures, sometimes we see amazing results. And of course, we don't want to overpromise because physiologically, you and I and our children are all very biologically different. But when we talk to experts in the field, they see these miracles every day when we simply get enough information to generate the courage to try something different. And in many cases, it doesn't cost you anything just to start turning this stuff off when you're not using it. So this NIH link is a really good one to give to people for high credibility and quick education. Now, one of the biggest gaps that we had when I fell down the rabbit hole more than a decade ago is we could tell a lot of people were developing these electromagnetic illnesses, but we had no way for even our healthcare practitioners to come into the fold on this. So we were so grateful that back in 2019, Dr. Lynn Patrick and Dr. Lisa Naj co-hosted the first electromagnetic fields medical conference. And then 2 years later, Elizabeth Kelly or Libby Kelly and a whole team of world-leading experts, we pulled together this additional conference that Dr. Magda Havas co-chaired with a neurosurgeon, Hillel Baldwin, Dr. Baldwin, back in 2021. And this was offering 24.5 continuing medical education credits. And since that 2-year time period for the credits has now expired, we have, with Libby's guidance, taken the entire conference and put it online at no charge. So anybody from citizen to emergency responders in our communities, to our doctors, our therapists, our dentists, our psychologists, everybody can go get professionally trained through this EMF medical conference. And the lectures are from like 20 minutes to a half hour to an hour. So you can easily slot them into your calendar and take all of this professional training on your own time at no charge. So like I said, we have incredible resources for everything that we need to know today to fix this issue. So that's my background and how I got involved. And I'll give you an overview of what we're going to cover in our remaining hour or so together. So we're going to overview the technology impacts on childhood development, on digital dependency, and then these new radiation illnesses that so many people are developing. And then we're going to talk about how do we regain that healthier balance and give you hope. Because without hope, boy, we sure don't have a lot, but there is so much to be hopeful about as we head into the new year. And we're going to teach you what you can do. What baby steps might you start thinking about today to begin reducing your exposures? And then there's a concept about a tech Sabbath where we actually unplug for a day and reconnect with ourselves, our loved ones, with nature and so forth. So that's what we're going to spend our time on today. And let's look to see what a child truly needs for proper development. Is it sitting in the shallows of a screen? No. What properly develops a child is moving their bodies, touching their environment, connecting with other human beings, connecting with their environment out in nature. We are part of nature, and we've lost a lot of that connection when 95% of the time people are indoors and on a screen. So this is what properly develops a child. When we have excessive tech outcomes, and this is a graphic that was loaned to us from our friend Chris Rowan up in Canada. She has this Zone-In program, and she tells us that when we spend the majority of our time on telephone or television, cell phones, other devices on the internet, we begin to develop lifestyle habits that are sedentary, isolated. We become neglectful of everything else in our lives. And all of this constant pulsation of radiation in the blue lights gets our systems overstimulated, which leads to developmental delay, obesity, mental illness, detachment from our world, and attention deficit hyperactivity disorder and autism. And then we start seeing the health fall out with diabetes, stroke, heart attack, addiction, violence, perversions, needing to get medicated, or some people choose to get medicated, impulsiveness and illiteracy. And it's not sustainable. We're going to be seeing earlier and earlier deaths, poor abilities to develop relationships, inabilities to hold down a job, and we just can't survive on this. So if we can begin to address these excessive tech outcomes, we can build it back. So to have a sustainable life, we need to have optimal development, not in front of screens. We need to learn how to develop attention and how to teach ourselves proper learning techniques. We need to be physically strong and coordinated. We need to feel secure in our environment so that it regulates all of our systems so that we can be calm and focused. And then these are other neurological and other developments that are critically important. And these come from those 4 touchstones of movement, physical touch, connection, meaningful, true connection with one another, and out in nature. So this is how we build a proper child. And since so many of us are on screens, this digital dependency is on the rise, which causes an overstimulation of the pleasure centers of the brain, which leads into addiction, much like alcohol, tobacco, drugs, pornography, gambling. It's hitting those same pleasure centers of the brain and causing addiction, poor academic performance. It's impairing our communication skills, our ability to show empathy to others, to be creative, to solve problems, to focus, and to control ourselves. If you try to separate a child from their device and they lose their mind, that's a pretty good sign that they need some help. And then because we're not teaching handwriting anymore, And we're replacing so much with tapping on a screen that we are underdeveloping our children's motor skills. And with all this sedentary activity, we are seeing drastic increases in obesity in adults and in children. And then the eye damage, what we're seeing now is an epidemic of myopia. So in our natural world, we are meant to be scanning to infinity and beyond out to the horizon for predators. We should always be on the lookout. That's just part of us being part of nature. But now, because we're in the shallows of these screens all the time, we're not scanning the horizon, which kept our eyeballs the shape they're supposed to be. We're now getting this myopia, which is changing the shape of the eye in both children and adults. So we know that there's also retinal damage from the blue light, and it just goes on and on. So once we know better, we can do better. Some of you may already know about this book that came out this year called The Anxious Generation by Dr. Jonathan Haidt out of New York University. He's a social psychologist, and he has identified 4 foundational harms that when back in about 2012, we started giving children smartphones, that they started developing social deprivation and spiritual degradation, sleep deprivation, attention fragmentation, and addiction dependencies on this technology. So what Dr. Haidt recommends is that we do not give smartphones to children before high school. They should never even have a social media account before 16 years old. And that we should have phone-free schools so that students are fully present for each other and for their teachers. And we did a big disservice when we started replacing the curiosity of childhood with fear. And we stopped letting children get out there to learn how to become resilient. When we hover over them too much, when we structure their entire day, when we intervene and instead of letting them sort things out with their friends and figure out how to compromise and how to conflict resolve, we are kind of crippling their ability to build the resiliency that they need to have to succeed and survive in this world. So it's a great book. He doesn't outright talk about EMFs as far as radio frequency radiation goes, the man-made stuff, but it's pretty funny. If you look at his book on page 1, he does this. If there were shuttles to Mars and they wanted to take some children with them, would you let your children go? And he starts outlining all these things that should make you think twice. And the first thing that he lists is radiation. He's talking about the natural radiation, but it made me chuckle because I know some of the other experts in our field are going to be reaching out to him to talk about the man-made radiation. So at least on page 1, that's a good segue to open that conversation with him, because it's all radiation, not just what nature has out there. So it's a great book. If anybody wants to really hunker down and learn sociologically what this is doing to our children. So Dr. Victoria Dunkley spoke at our first EMF medical conference, and this is actually a photograph of my book. When I read it, I just put all these stickies all over it because there are so many points that I wanted to reach out to different people to talk about. And I had a booth at the medical conference, and she came up and she laughed when she saw my book, and she picked it up and was just kind of fascinated. And it is rewarding to see that somebody's actually reading what you've written. But she is a psychiatrist, a medical doctor, and she has come up with a 4-week protocol to end these meltdowns, to raise the children's grades, to boost their social skills by reversing the effects of what she coined as electronic screen time syndrome. And so just know, for everything we've broken, we know how to fix it, and there are terrific resources for us and our families and our schools. So some might say, well, how does the American Academy of Pediatrics weigh in on this? So they have recommended no screen time before 2 years of age And only with a small child like that in a social interaction with the responsible adult. You'd never just leave your kid in front of a screen. And for the older children, the recommendation is no more than 1 or 2 hours per day on a screen. And they have a family media use plan, which you can use to sit down and whittle out a plan interactively with your own loved ones. So everyone has a say in what they're going to do and what commitments they're going to come up with. And if they break those commitments, what will be the outcome? So they do have that resource for us. Back in 2016, when I was doing this legislative work and working with my schools, or 2015, this is when we had our first bill to form a commission. And the Boston Parents paper came out with this incredible multi-page article in here asking, is Wi-Fi in schools safe? A look at the potential dangers. And Dr. Martha Herbert, who founded the Autism Lab at Massachusetts General Hospital. She's now retired, but she was a Harvard pediatric trained physician and a researcher and one of the world's leading experts on autism and other neurological issues. So this was a really nice article to share with parents. And again, here we're going on a decade ago since we've been talking about this. What I'd like to do for anybody who's watching with us today who has an iPhone, I invite you to take that out and go into your settings, because industry has pretty much convinced everybody that as soon as we open up our mouth and say, I think there's something wrong with wireless technology, industry has convinced everybody to impulsively think tinfoil hat conspiracy theory. But when we can show people the legal fine print in their own devices, it takes it from out here conspiracy theory to, whoa, what do you mean? This has been in there all along warning us. So let's walk through that on an iPhone. If you don't have an iPhone and you use another type of device, if you just look up your make and model and RF exposure for radio frequency exposure, you'll get to the legal fine print. So we're talking about radio frequency, two-way microwave radiation. And I'm going to walk you through the steps there, and then we're going to look at the science, and then we're going to look at the exposure sources. Where is this radiation coming from, and why don't we know? We'll give you some good information on that. So first, let's look at that legal fine print. So our friends at the Environmental Health Trust have a page here where you can go look up other devices, like the iPads had a disclaimer in there that talked about seizures and blackouts and eye strain and all these multiple antennas that are in there that people just don't know about. So from the settings of an iPhone, scroll down just a little ways and go into General. So settings to General, hit that, then go all the way down from General to the very bottom where you see Legal and Regulatory. Hit that, and on the next screen, about 4 down from the top, you see RF exposure. Again, we're talking about radio frequency radiation. It's microwave radiation that the industry politely calls energy, because it is a man-made energy form. Radio frequency, electromagnetic fields, microwave radiation. And in this legal fine print, they tell us that they tested this device at a distance from the body. So if you're tucking it in your bra or your shirt pocket or your suit pocket, or you're putting it in your yoga pants or your back pocket, you're exceeding the Federal Communication Commission's guidelines for public radiation exposure, which, by the way, were never safety tested for biological harm. And then, hey, they're good guys, right? So you read down a paragraph or two further and they say, to reduce your exposure, once you know you're radiating yourself, don't touch it. They say to use a hands-free option, like a headset that came with your device or speakerphone. I'm going to put a pause on my screen share for a moment and show you a couple of things. So again, for everything that we've broken, we know how to fix it. So if you do have to use a radiating device, you want to create as much distance from it as you can. So what I'm showing you here is something called a hollow tube or an air tube headset. It's just got rubber tips that hook over the ear and then plug in next to your brain. It's got these little ferrite beads that break the radiation from traveling up into these hollow tubes. And then it's got a metal wire that's nice and long. One of the properties of this man-made radiation is it amplifies around metal. So if you're plugging a radiating device in on one end and you're plugging a wire right up to your brain, that's not a great idea. Your brain is going, or your radiation is going, woohoo, man, we're going right up to the brain, party on, here we go. And we don't want to do that to ourselves. You don't want to be putting those earbuds in your brain either, because that is a microwave transmitter on this side and on this side, sending signal through your brain and also down to wherever that device is that they're paired with. So again, solutions for everything. You can look for a hollow tube or an air tube headset. And at the end of the presentation, we'll share with you some resources of some companies that offer products like that. So the next thing I want to do is give you a demonstration of what this invisible exposure looks like, because I had a really hard time getting my head around something that I can't see or touch or taste. Sadly, some of us can feel it. I've never felt good under fluorescent lights. That's another pulsation of man-made energy that my body all along has said, whoa, that's not really good for us here. So I've tried to use incandescent light bulbs instead of CFLs or fluorescent tubes. So I'm going to show you the radio frequency radiation detection meter that was recommended at that EMF medical conference. And it's about a $400 device. And this is the one that many of us are getting our libraries to purchase and put on loan, so that everybody in the community can borrow it if they can't afford to buy one of their own. So this is a Safe and Sound Pro 2 from Safe Technologies. And knowing what I know, once I stopped circling my tail, I went device by device throughout my house and thought, wow, I can do better. I'm the mom. I need to step up and figure this out. So I worked pretty hard to figure all this out and get rid of as much of the man-made radiation as I can. So I'm going to turn this on, and you see it lights, and then it drops down to where we are in this environment. And I'm at a nice green level. I know you can't read the numbers, so I'll share with you what we've got. It's the max number. What is the maximum spike of radiation that this meter is picking up in my home? Because it's that spiked erratic pulse that dysregulates our own electrical circuitry. So right now I'm at 4, and the unit of measurement is something called a microwatt per square meter. And in the scientific literature, they want us to be at 10 or less. So we're at 4, we want to be at 10 or less. I'm in a nice green zone here. But watch what happens. I'm going to take my cell phone out of airplane mode, which is where I keep it all the time. It's flying off the end of the red chart. That flashing red is as bad as it gets. And I'm not even doing anything. These are just the multiple antennas coming online in this device. So I'm going to stop radiating myself and go back into airplane mode. And we'll see as the radiation dissipates, it comes back down to this nice green zone. So what just happened was my one device has a number of different antennas in it. We never really were taught to think about all these different services they give us, like cellular and data and Bluetooth and Wi-Fi and locator and hotspot and 5G for anybody who didn't know any better and upgraded to a 5G phone. Each one of those has a separate antenna mounted in this phone that constantly pulses microwave radiation to make or maintain a handshake with the nearest cell tower or router. And again, today's message is not no technology, it's safe technology. So if we're not using a particular antenna, why radiate ourselves? We just go into the settings and turn off each antenna and make sure they say off, because if it, like your Bluetooth or your Wi-Fi, if they say on or not connected, you just need to tap that and then go turn it off. Otherwise, it's still going, hello, here I am. I want to connect with you. Pulse, pulse, pulse. So go into airplane mode and then check those other antennas and make sure everything's off. But these antennas are sneaky, so you really do have to measure. So we want to be at 10 or less. I was at 4. And when I turned on my one cell phone, we went to 1,530,000 microwatts per square meter. More than 1,000,000, and we want to be at 10, not 10,000, 10 or less. And most people have no idea that this could be a major player in a lot of the symptoms that they are suffering from today. So that's my little show and tell. I'm going to go ahead and resume my screen share and give us, some encouragement. So as I said, we can get these meters, we can get them for our libraries, but, let's talk a little bit about the science and what this wireless radiation is and why should I care? So when we went from our landline to these cell phones and all the other wireless devices, we got so much in the way of convenience, and that's what the industry spun up. But what did we give up? Well, we started dealing in these electromagnetic fields, and the Earth has its own beautiful electromagnetic pulsation. And that pulses this lovely healing energy 7.83 times per second. And the unit of measurement for that is called a hertz. So we and every other living thing on the planet are meant to be synchronized with this beautiful energy that the Earth gives us with these lovely electrons. So what do we do when we started getting into digital technology? In the megahertz range, which is what a lot of our devices operate at, instead of 7.83 times per second, we're getting 1,000,000 pulsations of microwave radiation, these spiked erratic pulses that are dysregulating our own circuitry. And then we got so fancy and got into the gigahertz range, which is 1,000,000,000 pulsations per second. 1,000,000,000. How they can put 1,000,000,000 of anything in a second is way beyond me. But we have simply gotten ourselves overpowered. And Dr. Martin Blank wrote a really good book called Overpowered. He was one of the scientists at Columbia University. And there's a deep body of reading we can all do, but this is what the electromagnetic spectrum is. We've got these long waves now that can go into our buildings to reach our devices. All that's left to monetize are these tiny little millimeter waves, and that's what the industry is spinning up as 5G. But in order for 5G to fly, they have to piggyback on these long wavelengths with these tiny little millimeter waves that can't travel very far. So the industry is looking to put cell towers everywhere, literally these small cell antennas every 2 to 12 houses inside our neighborhoods. So again, we know what we need to do, but there's no cavalry coming to fix this. It's up to the citizens to learn. And we'll give you some encouragements about public policy and lawsuits and all of that, but those take decades to come full circle. So it really falls to you and I to learn about this and decide if we do care. Some people say, we're all going to die anyway. But once we look at the science, you might decide this is not exactly how you'd choose to die if you knew better. So what does the science tell us? We're going to first look at the long-term effects, and then we'll take a look at some of the short-term effects that people are experiencing right now. So what the science is telling us is that this constant pulsation of microwave radiation can cause cancers. For years, the industry spun it saying, oh, there's no mechanism of harm identified in the scientific literature, so let's just keep doing what we're doing. Well, here in the United States at the National Institutes of Health, we have the National Toxicology Program, which is regarded in many circles as the gold standard for toxic research. The NTP, or the National Toxicology Program, completed a $30 million study that took them a couple of decades. They went in to see if cell phones could be harmful, and they thought probably not, but we better check it out. And this was ordered by our government through the Food and Drug Administration to do this study. And at the end of the day, they did an unprecedented 3-day peer review at the National Institutes of Health, and they determined clear evidence of cancerous tumors and DNA damage, among other findings. Now, clear evidence is the highest of 5 categories they could assign. Clear evidence of cancerous tumors and DNA damage. Well, industry will get a hold of these good studies and go, that's just one study. You need to have more than one study. So right on the heels of our National Toxicology Program, the Ramazzini Institute in Italy completed another large study, like 20 some odd million dollars, on cell towers, the base stations. And they found the same cancers and DNA damage that we found here in the United States. So it doesn't matter where this radiation is coming from. And even as far back as 2011, the World Health Organization determined this was a group 2B possible carcinogen. And now that we've done these animal studies, we know that needs to be upgraded to either a probable or a clear carcinogen. So science can always improve and refine, but we don't need more science to take action on this. It was the infertility studies. When I started reading those, that's what got me as a mom on my feet. I read that they had taken male human sperm and exposed it to a laptop with the antennas radiating, and it changed the DNA, which is our roadmap to grow a proper anything from a child to a plant to a pollinator to a biome of any type. It changed the DNA, it slowed the motility of the sperm, and it caused far fewer sperm to be viable, or what doctors would call apoptosis or programmed cell death, in just 4 hours of exposure. And I went, you've got to be kidding me. We just sent my oldest daughter off to college with her laptop, her MacBook, which she was using right on top of her reproductive organs. My youngest had just gone into high school, and we thought we'd give her a leg up. So for Christmas, we gave her a laptop. And here, both my girls are using this toxin right on top of their reproductive organs. And subsequent to that, Kaiser Permanente has put out a really good study on women's fertility and how those who are using wireless technology are having higher miscarriage rates and other reproductive harm. So the science is very strong in studies that have been repeated and revalidated. So it's all out there. And then neurotoxicity. Oh my goodness. Even before this COVID-19 pandemic, we had an epidemic of attention deficit and deficit hyperactivity disorder. Dr. Hugh Taylor, who heads up the OB/GYN program at Yale Medical School, has done some of the rodent studies on ADD, ADHD, and determined that when they expose the pregnant mice to this cell phone radiation, those pups came out developmentally bouncing off the walls of the cage, exhibiting behaviors much like a child with ADD, ADHD, not a care in the world, no focus. And then, as I mentioned, Dr. Martha Herbert over at the Autism Lab at Massachusetts General Hospital sees huge connections between what we know happens to the brain when it hits this tipping point of environmental exposures and can lead to these rapid increases we're seeing in autism. Dr. Martin Pall and others have done the science and culled the science on Alzheimer's, which used to hit people in their 80s and 90s, and then we started seeing it in our 70s, our 60s, our 50s, our 40s, our 30s, and even in rare cases in our 20s. how long can we continue to pollute the environment of the brain with these environmental exposures? And we're so grateful when well-known groups start getting funding to have resources on this issue. So as a mom, I learned about the Environmental Working Group, or EWG, because every year they put out a pesticide set of fact sheets, their Clean 15 and their Dirty Dozen. What produce should you try and buy organically, and which can you still eat conventionally without eating too many of the chemicals that it was grown with? So I already knew and trusted the Environmental Working Group, and now they have a PhD on staff who does the work on EMFs, and they have come out, these are just two of them, but they have the effects of radio frequency radiation on the nervous system. They also have one on protecting kids from wireless radiation in schools and at home. So know your audience. You know, again, when you open your mouth and talk about this issue, most people are already thinking tinfoil hat conspiracy theory. So know your audience. If they're science or doctors or engineers, we have all this wealth of information to help bring them up to speed in their own language. And for parents, we're grateful to have this set of information as well. And, you know, children are especially vulnerable. They're not just little adults. Their very systems are still under construction. Their DNA is still being developed. And with great thanks to the scientist, Dr. Om Gandhi, and his colleagues, they were able to model for us just how far into the brain this radiation penetrates. You and I, with our fully formed skull and brain, we've got a thicker skull, and children have a higher water content in their brain. So when we hold a transmitting device up to our head, that's pulsating our brain with microwaves about a third of the way through. These models are tilted sideways, and the little yellow part is the ear. On a 10-year-old child, we're microwaving about 3/4 of the brain, and on a 5-year-old child, we're microwaving almost their entire brain. So we need to learn, and we need to step up and do everything we can think of to protect our children. So let's talk now about the short-term effects. We should know that with great thanks to Libby Kelly and other colleagues who have been working on this for years, a couple of decades ago, the Americans with Disabilities Act recognized these electromagnetic sensitivities and multiple chemical sensitivities, and they have information on their website for how to offer accommodations in the workforce for these man-made illnesses. So just know that even though we may not know about this, it's already known in certain circles. So the good news is that a lot of people who come to one of these training webinars or learn from somebody else will come back and say, oh my gosh, I didn't want to know about this. I live on my device. It runs my everyday. But dang it if I didn't recognize some of these symptoms. And I took the suggestion to create a sleep sanctuary, get rid of it all at night, your alarm clock, your camera, your clock, any entertainment that you've downloaded on your device, it still works. You can put it in full airplane mode and still use whatever's on it. But when we turn off all those antennas, we actually have people come back and say, wow, this really aligns with the science. Insomnia is huge. And now we know more about the mechanisms of harm. So in the wee hours of darkness, you know, we are light beings. We operate with our circadian rhythm on the 24-hour clock of light and darkness, night and day. And in the wee hours of darkness, the brain is meant to release melatonin from the pineal gland, and melatonin has some really important jobs. It goes in and regulates our sleep cycle and also helps to escort the toxins of the day out of the body through the bloodstream. So what happens when we leave this man-made light energy form pulsating all night long? Well, a lot of people get to a point where the brain's going, when's it going to get dark so I can release that melatonin? And without the melatonin, people start getting into this bad cycle where they don't sleep right anymore. And their body's mechanism of cleanup is being impaired because they're not getting that melatonin. Headaches, nosebleeds, ear bleeds, chronic fatigue. Dr. Magda Havas, who had joined us tonight, I'm going to just see if I can look a little bit more and see if Dr. Havas is with us still. Dr. Havas, if you're listening along, would you like to unmute and talk us through what rouleau formation is? I remember one of the studies that you did looking underneath a microscope showing us what this rouleau formation looks like, and I would be so honored if you could talk us through this.
I'd be happy to, Cece. Can you hear me okay?
I can, thank you.
Okay. Well, I was curious about some healing technologies, believe it or not, pulsed electromagnetic field therapy, because electromagnetic fields can be both harmful and beneficial to the body, depending on what the frequency is and a number of other parameters. And so I was testing the validity that some of the people that were manufacturing these PMF devices were claiming that it helps blood circulation, which is obviously very important to the body. And so I purchased a mat and exposed myself, and I couldn't feel a difference. So I was actually quite skeptical that these mats did anything. And then I wanted to see if it affected the circulation of my blood. So I took a drop of blood, put it under a microscope, and looked at it. And my blood, I'm like you, I'm in an electromagnetically clean home. Everything is wired. I then exposed myself to a Wi-Fi router. And my blood within 10 minutes had the consistency of ketchup. And Dr. Stephen Sinatra, who was a world-renowned cardiologist, he's now passed, he said our blood should have the consistency of red wine. And what he was noticing in his cardiology practice is that people were coming in with very viscous blood. And this puts a lot of pressure on the heart. It increases your blood pressure. It can lead to stroke. It can lead to heart attacks, all sorts of other things. And I was stunned that my blood reacted that way. I then laid on the mat for 10 minutes and it totally cleared up. My blood returned to the consistency of red wine. So I was convinced that, first of all, the mats do actually work, which is what I was testing. But I then realized that I was electrosensitive, even though I can't tell, like some other people, when I'm exposed. I don't have that sensitivity. But for those who do have that sensitivity, in a way, it's a real gift because they know when they're in a dirty, electromagnetically dirty environment, and they can take steps to minimize their exposure.
We are so grateful for your research. And in my little brain, when I first heard rouleau formation, it sounded to me like the candy Rolos, where you've got the caramel and the chocolate, little candies all stacked up. Because as I understand it, this is an electromagnetic field and it was causing our red blood cells to glom together and stack up like a stack of coins that could then not get to where it needed to go to bring oxygen to our blood and to all of our organs and stuff. So I'm so very grateful for your research and your guidance and your leadership on this issue, Magda. And thank you for sharing your science with us.
Thank you for asking, and very much appreciate you sharing this information with more and more people, because if we don't educate the public, they're just going to become sick. And unfortunately, we have to educate the medical profession as well, because they're not aware of some of these harmful effects. So thank you very much for what you're doing as well. And I'll go back to listening mode.
Okay, and again, I'm so grateful. Dr. Havas was also the co-chair of the EMF Medical Conference, as I mentioned, which is available online at no charge. So we know how to train our doctors now. Pain from unidentified sources, skin abnormalities. Some people, when you open this conversation, will say, yeah, man, I've been having my ear get really hot. That's one symptom. And then other people will talk about rashes and flushing and heating and tingling under the skin. What we've learned is that, every living creature has these mechanisms to help them navigate their world. And one of ours is these little tiny antennas in the surface of our skin. And those get overpowered by these electromagnetic pulsations and can cause these skin abnormalities. And as Dr. Havas mentioned, these heart irregularities, palpitations, arrhythmias, some people describe it as it feels like somebody's sitting on their chest, difficulty breathing, high blood pressure, low blood pressure, depending on your own individual proclivity. When we start messing with the blood, we might see a lot of unusual formations. And then cognitive impairment, where we just can't think straight anymore. And one of the statements that was said by several of our presenters at the EMF Medical Conference, it just broke my heart, especially in light this week, because we've had another school shooting, that if we don't stop microwaving our children's brains, we can very well expect many more of these societal outbursts, because it is physiologically changing the gray matter and the white matter of the brain, where people once made better choices and decisions. So if we keep damaging our brains, we are likely to see many more of this anger. And I remember here in Boston, when the kids went back to school after the pandemic, what did we do? We issued every child a Chromebook or a tablet to access their education with not one shred of safety training. So these kids got heavily exposed for many more hours on end than they normally would have, because mom and dad are trying to work. So we know a lot of kids had unfettered access, and this harm is, like any toxin, cumulative with dose. So the longer we expose ourselves and don't give our bodies a chance to repair, the greater the accumulation of the harm. So here in Boston, there were 3 school districts reporting in the news that these kids were losing control in the schools and literally beating on one another with their tablets. And I was chatting with a woman in a yoga class, and it turns out she was a counselor at a high school in the town next to me. She says, "Oh my gosh, one of my colleagues is out on disability right now because one of the boys beat her up with his Chromebook." So it's happening. And the more we can learn and calmly and compassionately share this information with others, the better the odds are that we can take control of this and protect our kids long before public policy catches up, because that's usually the last piece to fall into place. So again, pre-pandemic, we already had epidemic levels of anxiety, depression, and suicidal ideation among children, let alone the adults. So something went desperately wrong, and this looks to be one of the major smoking guns. So what can we do? We can realize that now that we know, we have a choice in how we use smartphones and Bluetooth technologies. We can turn off all the antennas when we're not needing them. We can do the same thing with our Wi-Fi, our routers. We can do the same thing with our cordless phones and headsets. We can replace those with wired devices. And then we can hardwire our tablets, our laptops, our printers, our mice, and our keyboards. Any gamer will tell you that you're going to have far better response when you're hardwired through an Ethernet cable and an adapter than you ever will be with anything wireless. Wireless's best selling point is convenience, but hands down, wired connections beat it out on every other marker, from health, from safety, from reliability, from speed, to data protection and security, sustainability, energy consumption. Hardwired technology wins hands down. And virtual reality, now that we know, why would we ever put a radiating device up to our forehead, our eyes, and our brain? Baby monitors. We need to be vigilant. Do what we all used to do. Get a hardwired baby monitor, or learn how to adapt the ones that you have to hardwire them. And then those smart hearing aids, again, you're putting a microwave transmitter right on your brain. There are options. And all the wearables, you know, a lot of the applications will still work on your smartwatch if you turn off the transmitters, turn off the Wi-Fi and the Bluetooth and so forth. and then set it off your body if you need to synchronize it with your other devices, but never let that thing pulsate right on your body. And now with 5G and the Internet of Things, oh my goodness, the industry selling us what they're selling us is now forecasting that we will have, all of us, 200 wireless devices connected to the Internet of Things in our homes. 200. Can you imagine the electro pollution that's going to be we'll be steeped in it. So we should know. So knowing what I know, our old stove bit the dust and we needed to get a new one. And my husband found a floor model that got hooked up and it said smart something or other on it. And I went, whoa. I remember when my girlfriend got a new stove, we could go right into the settings and find that Wi-Fi antenna and just turn it off. That was easy. And then we measured and make sure there wasn't anything else. With mine, I couldn't find it. And so I pulled out the manual and the manual said, it said stay like 20 centimeters away from this. And I'm like, what? It's telling me to stand 20 centimeters away from my stove? How can I cook? So I'm going to be the thing getting cooked in my kitchen with this thing radiating. So I measured it. And again, in my home, I'm usually around a 4 or 5 microwatts. I measured that darn stove and it was 1,090,000 microwatts all the time, pulsating microwave radiation. For what? So somebody outside the house can pair it up with their phone and turn your stove on and heat it up before you get home. I'm sorry, that's too big of a risk for me. So I contacted the manufacturer. They sent tech support to my house. And at the end of the day, all the guy had to do was pull off the back of my stove, and next to the motherboard behind the digital display was this other little tiny antenna. All we had to do was unplug this little board, and that was it. And then we measured again, and I was back in safer levels. And then on a lark, I measured my TV one day, which I thought I had remediated, but turns out it was radiating at 40,000. And there was nothing the manufacturer could do to help me disable that. So I picked up our big screen and I put it in my car and I drove it down to the IT guy in my town. And I said, hey, would you be able to open this up and just disconnect whatever that wireless motherboard or board is connected to the motherboard? And I came back a couple hours later and he had gotten to my job. And this is what it was. Just this little tiny board that plugged into the motherboard. And once we removed it, I have an Ethernet port on my TV, so I could just plug the Ethernet cable in and get, Netflix or whatever my kids were watching. So this is the enemy. That's all it is. It's a little piece of electronics that we need to learn how to control and reduce as much as we can. So those are things that you and I may have direct control over. Then there's those things we may or may not have control over. We're not going to spend a ton of time on this tonight, but I just want you to be aware of what industry is pushing into our communities. So wireless access points. These are the Wi-Fi things that are being mounted on the ceilings in our schools, in our libraries, in our town halls. And they all pulsate microwave radiation continuously. Engineers, I think, once, we bring this in enough volume from the public, they could engineer these things into eco mode because there are already eco mode routers available on the market, especially in Europe, that only pulsate when something's trying to make a connection, and then they go quiet the rest of the time. But the beauty of these, like this is the Ruckus. This is the one that was put into my new elementary school here in Ashland. And I looked it up, and when you flip these things over, on the back side, there's 2 Ethernet ports. So all you have to do is drop a wire down and plug in your devices at task level. So those wireless access points are a heavy emitter. These macro cell towers, these are the big cell towers that we started with out in industrial parks, like 300 feet up in the air, far away from where anybody was. And then as industry kept selling more product, they needed more capacity. So they needed more cell towers. So they started encroaching more and more, closer and closer to where we live, where we work, where we play, where we worship, where we learn. And now we see these big macro cell antennas mounted, looking like ridiculous trees that have all these plastics covering them up that then create pollution in our water and our air as they degrade. Bad news all around. But coming so close to us, mounted on buildings, mounted on rooftops, mounted inside buildings, is really disastrous. And now we've got these 5G small cells. They still have to have all of these macro cells for the backbone. And now this is what some of these small cells are looking like, hanging on wires, on posts, on poles, on lights, on, intersection lights. And these are pulsing additional layers of microwave radiation. Now, here in Massachusetts, and I know in other states, the utility companies are talking their way into these smart grid programs for gas, water, electric, solar, maybe even propane, where when I was a little kid, I'm the youngest of 10 kids, and we did a lot of playing outside. When we do hide and seek, I'd be hiding in the bushes, and 10 kids, it takes a while to be found. So keep myself entertained. I just sit there watching the dials going around on these old analog utility meters. These were just mechanical devices that measured how much of the utility we were using, and then somebody walked through the neighborhood, took our reading, and sent us our bill. That's a safe analog meter that would last 40 or 50 years before its useful life expired. Now industry has convinced our towns that we need digital technology, and these have to be replaced much more frequently, which is good for their bottom line. But unfortunately for us, with digital technology, these are pulsating microwaves all day, every day. The industry will say, oh, it's just a few seconds a day. But I took my meter and I sat in my dining room on the floor next to where these are mounted outside. And when I did the math, I was getting pulsations 17,000 times a day, these spikes of microwave. So if you've got anybody spending time, do your scavenger hunt. Where is your electric meter? Where's your gas? Where's your water? Where's your solar if you have it? And anything else. And look, if there's an FCC ID number on it, that's your clue that it's pulsating microwave radiation. And you want to do your best to stay away from that area of the home for any length of time, and certainly move bedrooms if it's mounted anywhere near your sleeping area. And here in Massachusetts, National Grid and Eversource have been telling our utility, Department of Public Utilities, that their fleet is aging out and they need to replace them all with smart meters in the coming years. And they're already starting in Massachusetts. And now we've got all these satellites beaming microwave radiation down to connect with your devices on the ground. So there's a lot of people working really hard in the background on this, but we need to just keep learning and bringing the awareness to our own communities till we reach a loud enough voice to hit critical mass where we can apply the pressure to change the dirty politics that are going on around all of this. So speaking of which, one of my big head scratchers was, if this is as bad as little me can go find out just by reading the science, surely somebody's got to have our backs on this. Why don't we know about this? So back in 2015, I was so grateful to see that the Harvard Law School Center for Ethics came out with this groundbreaking report called Captured Agency: How the Federal Communications Commission is dominated by these industries they presumably regulate. So notice that on the cover of their free online 59-page report, they've got this graphic that is a revolving door. And that's what many of our federal agencies have become today, is a mouthpiece for industry. And people who work for industry are now heading up our federal agencies. And people who leave our federal agencies often go and work for industry. So it's really kind of a crooked system right now. But that was my missing piece that helped me to find the courage to start speaking up on this, because I went, whoa, There is nobody who's got our backs. There's no cavalry coming. We have to do what we do best, which is to learn and make balanced choices on how we engage with technology. So sadly, one of the reasons why we don't know is that most of mainstream media has been bought out. We used to have like 50 mainstream media channels, independent reporting, and they got bought up, and they got bought up, and they got bought up. And now we have like 4 to 6 major conglomerations that by and large are owned by these parent companies that own the wireless industry, the telecom industry, the energy industry, big tech. And so the information we get through mainstream media is all filtered through their lens. What's most profitable for them? Follow the dollar. And so they don't report on these excellent studies that get published. So we're left in the dark. So out at Massachusetts for Safe Technology, here in our state, I gather up stories that are published by local media. So when you bring this up with your friends or your town and they're like, psh, that's not right, nobody's talking about this, you go look at the news page, look at all these articles, look at all these towns that are already ahead of us, looking at their zoning bylaws, like Laurie mentioned, and doing something to start the conversation and start protecting their citizens. I mentioned that $30 million study that was begotten by our Food and Drug Administration. When we determined clear evidence of cancerous tumors and DNA damage, the FDA was supposed to take that and translate that into public policy that would protect you and I in the environment. Instead, the gentleman who was in charge of the FDA's radiation sector at that time went over to the FCC and said, nah, we don't really need to update those outdated 1996 public radiation exposure limits. We don't believe that study. Let's just keep doing what we're doing. Well, one might ask, what would ever possess Dr. Jeffrey Shuren to do that? Well, let's do our research. And we find out that Dr. Shuren was married to a woman who's a partner in a law firm that represents big Wi-Fi, telecom, and a whole bunch of big other industries, and not looking out for public health and safety. So huge conflicts of interest. And sadly, they go all the way up to the World Health Organization. I never knew, but there are 2 groups at the WHO who are responsible for regulating electromagnetic radiation. One group was the independent scientists whose life's work is investigating this, and the other group is heavily funded by industry. And when the National Toxicology Program and the Ramazzini Institute in Italy both concluded clear evidence of cancerous tumors and DNA damage, that was enough pressure for the World Health Organization to reopen the investigation and set a timeline for this. And they came up with a number of areas aside from cancer: infertility, electromagnetic radiation syndrome, the impact on the elderly, the impact on children, the impact on those with electromagnetic illnesses, the impact on the environment. They were supposed to be doing an independent investigation on this, and now they've started sending out these wacky reports where they're just chucking aside all this highly credible science and just cherry picking these studies that follow the industry's speak. So we've got this corruption all the way up to the World Health Organization and serious conflicts of interest. There are recent articles that have just come out, and you'll find those here if you go take a look. So I mentioned earlier, people will ask, well, what does the American Academy of Pediatrics say about this? So yes, they do have their family media plan, but they have yet to acknowledge publicly that this man-made radiation is a huge threat to our children. And when I was putting this presentation together, I went, well, hello, look at this on their family media plan. Look at this nice sponsorship by AT&T. So a lot of our organizations that should be independent are now pretty much run by industry funding, even down to the Girl Scouts. Didn't Ericsson, which is a manufacturer of wireless technology, get the Girl Scouts to come up with a badge for 5G and the Internet of Things? And they redesigned their sashes and put a cell phone pocket in it. So your little darlings can put their cell phone right over their heart, their reproductive organs, their lungs, without any training on how to keep it in full airplane mode and keep their little bodies safe. So the industry knows no bounds. And so nobody's coming to fix this for us. We've got to do it ourselves. So as I said, there's always hope, and God bless Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. He highlighted for us that when meaningful change finally comes into our society, it comes in through 3 channels, and we're going to hit on some of those highlights for you. The public learns, engages, and we start demanding important change. And that's what we hope to inspire today. At least start taking your own baby steps. It eventually goes through the courts, and then public policy finally catches up. So again, for you and I, for what we have control over, let's exercise that control. If you look at your router, you'll see on the bottom or the side or back, it's got Ethernet ports. Get a big long Ethernet cable. Look for a shielded one if you're buying something new. That just means it's got a foil liner inside the plastic, and that keeps other forms of electric and magnetic fields from pulsating off the wires into your living space. And then most of us have multiple devices these days, so you can get something like an extension box for electronics. It's called an Ethernet switch. This one happens to have, 5 ports in it. You plug a main cord, a main Ethernet cable into the first port or one of them, and then just start plugging in all your own little Ethernet cables for each of your devices. You can buy these little $30 adapters, may even be cheaper for like the Chromebook and stuff. But this one here is something called the lightning adapter, and that allows you to hardwire an iPhone, and again, it's really plug and play is the first step. Just hook it up to your Ethernet cable, right? And plug it in on the other end of your router or an Ethernet switch. And not only are you being safer, but you're going to notice incredibly faster speeds, more reliability, and as I mentioned earlier, data security and privacy, sustainability, energy consumption. Wireless consumes 10 times more energy than these hardwired hookups. In fact, way back in 2012, there was a Greenpeace analyst who crunched the numbers and said, if the cloud were a country, it would be the 5th largest consumer of energy in the world. 5th largest, and that was 12 years ago. And look at how much more we've been pushed into since then. So yeah, if we're going to get serious about, being green, this is a great place to start. So plug everything in, and then you have to go find all those antennas and turn each one off. And who knew, but you can go right into your settings and look for phone, and you can forward your cell phone calls to your landline. Because remember, this was never meant to be used indoors. This is supposed to be mobile technology, but industry pushed more and more and more, right? So this is the phone that I use. It's an AT&T CL2909 that I got at Staples for 20 or 30 bucks. And so I just forward my cell phone calls to my landline. And by now, everybody knows I only use my cell phone for emergencies, so they just call my landline. But same thing with the laptops and the tablets, just plug everything in and then turn off the antennas in the settings. But you really do need to measure, because some of these antennas are tricky. You don't even know they're in there, and something is still radiating. So you just will have to go, into your manual or into your phone and look for whatever else is still radiating. So that's how we control it. Hardwire, turn off the antennas, and then measure. And here's what it looks like at school. You drop that wire down from the wireless access points, or a lot of schools still have Ethernet ports right in the walls. and they can just plug in the devices and turn off the antennas. And our friends, Patty and Doug Wood at Tech Safe Schools, they have great information for our IT directors and our school administrators. Who knew, but when we buy all this equipment, it comes factory delivered at full tilt. So 100% power, 100% beacon signal. And a friend of ours out in Silicon Valley, Peter Sullivan, he went to the Palo Alto School District and they went and took some measurements. First, they found out that they had upgraded their system, but they never turned the old one off. So now they're getting a double whammy of microwave radiation. And all they had to do was turn one system off to reduce exposures greatly. And then they discovered that you don't need 100% full blast on the power to maintain connectivity. They were able to take it down more than 90% and still have the connectivity that they needed, but they reduced the biological exposure greatly. And you can reduce that beacon signal greatly. Instead of pulsating, 100 times a second, you can still contain a connection at like 10 times a second. So again, a 90% reduction. But our schools have no idea to even be looking at this. And that's where you and I come in. And never go alone. Never go alone. That was my hard lesson learned. The goal is to educate everybody around you first, and I'm happy to carry that ball of wax. I do these free webinars every month, so we always have a free, safe, credible place to go to learn. And then people will take baby steps and, gain the confidence to then go talk to the schools as a group. Do not go it alone. You'll be very easily swept under the rug, because they've only been told all Wi-Fi all the time is the way to go, and they've invested money in it. So it's a tough thing for our schools to hear. But once they learn and they start recognizing how sick the teachers and the staff and the children are, and that this may help, then we can make some progress. So that's what we can do. And then in the legal arena, the FCC has been sued for ignoring 11,000 pages of evidence of harm. They've been found guilty, and the court ordered them to account for the vulnerability to children, to the elderly, to those with electromagnetic illnesses, to the environment. And it's now been 4 years, and the FCC has done nothing because the courts did not give them a deadline. And with whatever system that is, it takes maybe 5 years to play out before they can go at it again. So we're coming up on that. And then here in Massachusetts, our state level legal guidelines for boards of health already has a 4-page section on cell towers. And we have another landmark lawsuit happening here in Pittsfield, Massachusetts, where Verizon put a cell tower up on top of a school, or I'm sorry, on top of a neighborhood that made 17 children and adults so ill that the Board of Health determined their homes were uninhabitable. And so for the first time in the United States, a Board of Health issued a cease and desist order to Verizon, and it's caught up in legal red tape right now. But this is an excellent document to establish credibility and to debunk the credibility of these so-called experts that industry brings in, because this Board of Health did their research and found out that this, PhD Dr. Swanson sounds good on paper, but he's never published one study on the biological effects of man-made radiation. He specializes in other physics factors like quarks and whatever. So this is an excellent document to share with your towns. And then we had another groundbreaking court case here at this extremely prestigious international boarding school where like Saudi princes send their sons to be educated. There was this little boy in the feeder school, the Faith School, that feeds up into St. Mark's. He was getting all these electromagnetic illness symptoms and nobody knew what was going on. And eventually, after a couple of years, the parents did their own research and figured out that they need to get an environmental health doctor who was able to accurately diagnose their son with electromagnetic illnesses. And so this family asked for accommodation with the doctor's note, and they were refused. This school had been better known to disenroll families who raise any kind of issue because they have an international wait list a mile long. So they equipped the child with a dosimeter, which measures the heart, and they also equipped him with a high-end recording radio frequency detection meter. And at the end of the day, when they looked at the two data sets, the child's heart spiked where there were high EMFs. And so they went back to the school and asked for accommodations. And again, they were refused. They came back a third time and said, look, we're privileged to have the financial means. Can we please pay out of pocket to hardwire the classrooms that our now 7th grade son is going to need to be in? And once again, they were denied accessibility. So they sued. And under the Americans with Disabilities Act, every child on American soil is meant to have reasonable conditions to access their education. And while they didn't win the entire court case, they did have a win in that when the experts were brought in for the first time in American courts, they recognized that you do not have to have heat to have harm, because our FCC guidelines allow this much radiation based only on how much heat would it take to raise the temperature of the gel inside this mannequin's head, not even like real brain, but this gel. And the dude was military specs, 90th percentile military fitness. That's the only testing they did for 6 minutes or 30 minutes on how long it would take to heat this gel up. So for the first time in US courts, they recognize that you don't have to have heat to have harm. There are biological effects happening at the non-thermal level, hundreds of thousands of times below what the industry and the FCC allow today. So again, great things are happening in court cases all over the country, all over the world, but it's a slow-moving engine, and we have the opportunity to protect our children in the meantime. Public policy, again, is usually the last thing, but I mentioned that Deb Hodgson up in New Hampshire got so sick from the wireless in her home. She talked to her legislator. He came down, we sat at my kitchen table, connected the dots, and he came up with this amazing bill with very pointed questions like, why do Lloyd's of London and Swiss Re and AM Best long since recognized this is a world-leading risk, and they put exclusions in their policies, so that leaves our towns vulnerable for liability. Why does that legal fine print that we looked at the beginning of today's talk even exist that says keep it away from your body? Why is the FCC ignoring thousands of studies, and why do they keep talking about these thermal effects when we know there's harm at the non-thermal levels? Why do we allow 100 times more radiation than certain other countries? And why is nobody looking at what happens when you expose us to many different devices from many different sources all at once, that cumulative effect? So we worked really hard. We got leading experts to testify. And in 7 months' time, we got that bill through the House Committee on Science, Tech, and Energy. We got it through the Senate Committee on Health and Human Services, and under Governor Sununu's pen, signed into law in 7 months. And here we've had bills in Massachusetts for more than 10 years. And I just learned we have more than 10,000 bills of all sorts filed this session. Guess how many passed? 21. 21 bills out of 10,000. So we don't have high hopes that our bills are going to pass anytime soon. But bless New Hampshire, they passed their bill in 7 months, stating they had to spend 1 year, form a commission, talk to the experts, and see what this issue is. And they came out with this groundbreaking commission report, even during the pandemic, documenting the conflicts of interest with the industry and the FCC and the FDA and other agencies, and making 15 recommendations to educate the public, to put setbacks in place so you cannot put cell towers or smart meters or anything else that's transmitting in close range to where we live, in our schools and our medical facilities. Get a registry of harm established, so as people develop these microwave sicknesses, they have some place to gather the data and make informed public health decisions. Get our federal delegates on board, get our building inspectors trained, and protect our environment as well. So this was an incredible report. The next step is once you have a commission report, you need to take the recommendations and introduce new legislation to turn those into law. Well, I'll be darned if every time we try to get new bills introduced, the industry just rolls into town with their deep pockets and they torpedo our efforts. So again, there's movement, but not fast enough to protect you and I and our children and our pollinators. So yeah, we have 6 bills currently in Massachusetts, but they're all about to expire, and we are working to see if we can get our legislators to bring them back, but they're kind of like placeholders. So when we do hit a tipping point, we at least have something on the books to move quickly. So great solutions for our healthcare practitioners. As we mentioned, here's the EMF Medical Conference. And if you click on this link, here's a document that you can print out and hand to your healthcare practitioners, hand to your school nurses and psychologists and therapists, hand to your EMTs, your police, your fire. And with great thanks to Dr. Magda Havis, she did a pre-conference set of lectures that will bring people up to speed basically on what are EMFs. So let's get that out of the way first, and then listen to world-leading experts on what the science has found and what we can do about it. So Dr. Cindy Russell and others built a website called Physicians for Safe Technology, which is a great place to send other healthcare practitioners for credible information. And for engineers and physicists and technologists and architects, after we were down at the National Institutes of Health, Frank Clegg from Microsoft Canada gathered up a bunch of experts, and there was a call for papers at this conference. And Frank led an effort with the scientists, with the doctors, with building biologists who are certified trained professionals to go in and measure and mitigate exposures. What actually makes smart and healthy buildings with regard to radio frequency radiation? So know your audience. Most engineers, physicists, technologists have no idea about this. So let's hand them highly credible sources to start this conversation. And our schools, we need to get on this yesterday because our kids are bombarded. I took some measurements in my town, and boy, I'll tell you, it was frightening. It was in the red everywhere I went inside that school building. The New York Times did an expose of a series of articles some years ago about what Silicon Valley executives are doing with children. Their children, they're sending them to schools with no technology. They know a kid does not develop properly in front of a screen. No technology. They went so far as to have their nannies sign contracts that there will be no screens near their children. With great thanks to Dr. Holly Grow. Dr. Holly Grow down in Louisiana. She's a corneal surgeon, ophthalmologist, and she got other doctors, heart specialists, lifestyle specialists, obesity, and they got a bill unanimously passed. You know, we've all been sold by industry. We need to bring that pendulum back to the middle and get some balance back on how to integrate technology reasonably where we think we need it. So they got this unanimous bill passed into law to get their Department of Education, their technology, their Department of Health to work together. And they came up with these school best practices for digital devices. They didn't take on the EMFs head on, but when you look at the recommendations on the Bluetooth earbuds and stuff, there is actually talk through those links about radiation. So it's kind of a backdoor way, but they did get it in there. Maryland at their state level is recommending that we hardwire our schools. You can look at their fact sheet. Other countries are already getting ahead of this because they know we were sold a bill of goods with ed tech. It is not improving educational outcomes. It's a huge distraction. It's crippling so many children with their social and emotional development. And so Finland, the Netherlands, Sweden, and others are already taking steps actively now to remove technology from the schools. And with great thanks to the work that, you know, Dr. Jonathan Haidt and others had done, you know, through books like The Anxious Generation, it's giving our schools the courage to step up and do these bell-to-bell cell phone restrictions. And now we have worked with the Los Angeles Unified School District and some of the activists there and helped them to craft a letter. And that was given to the LAUSD in recent months, saying, bravo, we understand that in February you're going to be putting in a cell phone policy, and congratulations, that's such a great important step. But make sure when you store those phones, you're not just putting them like in a shoe rack at the back of the classroom with 20 or 30 devices radiating the heck out of the kids who are sitting right there. Make sure that they're turned off or put into a metal container, like even a metal file cabinet would be a better choice, or a metal can with a lid, because it will contain the radio frequency if the kids are not following instructions to turn these devices completely off during the school day. So once you store them safely, then next step, let's start the conversation about the other exposures from the educational equipment that's radiating that we can teach you how to hardwire. So lots of great actions happening now and lots of really good resources. Patty and Doug Wood at Tech Safe Schools have this national program where they teach the science, they teach the legal and health risks, and then they also give the mitigation solutions for the IT team. And who knew, but the Massachusetts Breast Cancer Coalition has already created prevention curriculum for grades kindergarten up through grade 12. So we've already got these super resources our schools can adopt. And Dr. Alexia McKnight, who became very sick when a smart meter went in on her home, she is actually a radiologist. She's a large animal veterinarian radiologist, and she had no idea about this man-made radiation as far as human and animal harm. She got so neurotoxic from the smart meter that she was out in traffic one day with her daughter in the car, and she could not remember if that green light meant stop or go. 50-50 proposition, and thank goodness she made the right choice and got home safely. So they were doing a health and wellness professional development day at her schools in Pennsylvania. And so she and I were brought in, and we did a 46-minute professional development program that we ran 4 times during that day. So we've already got materials developed for that. If you can get your schools to bring this in, we are there to help you. And then here's this little online course that we've got. We can literally train your whole school in about an hour online. And it kicks out a nice little handy tip sheet at the end for training compliance tracking. There's a certificate of completion. There's a little quiz you do throughout, and you get a score at the end. So all these resources that we didn't have a decade ago. So we know that for those just joining the conversation, as Dr. Lynn Patrick said at the first EMF medical conference, she said, guys, we know this is like drinking water out of a fire hose. But once you know, you're halfway there. Now let's just see what we can do. So what might you do? Let's keep learning. I'm doing these free webinars every month, so keep coming back. A lot of people will learn a little bit, change one thing, come back, learn a little more, change something else. So you're welcome anytime. Come join us. So come to our upcoming webinars. Some of you may have seen the Social Dilemma documentary. It's out on Netflix and other places, but these are the guys who invented social media. They realize it has been gone awry. It is now being used for purposes it was never intended for, and they encourage us to get off of social media, like the founders of social media. So I watched this with my daughter when she was in her early 20s, and it clicked for her. She's like, wow, Mom, we are really getting manipulated, aren't we? And so it's powerful. So a good partner film for that about the EMFs is Generation Zapped. It came out in 2018. It won many accolades. It was chosen as part of the United Nations Film Festival. It won Best Documentary at the Women's International Film Festival, the DC Independent Film Festival, and more. And it's now available through the streaming services with your library, Canopy or Hoopla, Canopy with a K. You can watch it for free there. You can watch it for free online on YouTube with ads. You can download it through many other streaming services. But this is a great way to credibly start the conversation with your loved ones in your own living room. Some people will bring me in for a community screening, maybe at a library, and then I can fill in the gaps of what's happened since that film came out in 2018 and where we are today. And with great thanks to Dr. Joel Moskowitz at the UC Berkeley School of Public Health, when that $30 million National Toxicology Program was coming out, he came up with a fact sheet that really resonated with me because it was really quick and easy to skim, to hand somebody something credible to counter all of the information that we've been given from industry that isn't quite on the up and up. So I asked Dr. Moskowitz his permission to model something after that I call EMF Points of Confusion versus Fact. It's a 4-page fact sheet that looks like this. The 4th page is a graphic showing, all those points on the body where people are getting sick from this. So it's got things like, well, the SEC says it's fine. Well, here's what you need to know. The SEC is being sued for ignoring the science. Or with the inverse square law of physics, damage typically drops off with distance. Well, for some things that's true, but with this pulsation of microwave radiation, it's still getting you from that cell tower far away. It's still getting you inside your home. So we can help debunk a lot of disinformation that's been spread out there with this little sheet. And some of the folks have told me that they just print it out and keep copies in their briefcase, in their glove box, and hand it to people so they have some place to go. And this is on my resources page at Massachusetts for Safe Technology. So for today, let's see if we can align with this thing called the ALARA principle. It's what our Centers for Disease Control and the European Parliament use to try and steer the ship. The goal is to get to exposures that are as low as reasonably achievable. So how do we do that? How do we reduce our screen time and our radiation exposure? Step 1 is start by noticing how much time, what are your habits, and what is radiating you. And then start with baby steps. So you don't have to feel overwhelmed because we know it's overwhelming, but start with baby steps. What's the one thing you might do today? Maybe tonight you're going to create a sleep sanctuary. And our friends at the Building Biology Institute have a fact sheet here that you can bone up on. Plug in, make your way from the sleep sanctuary, and then eventually just start getting rid of all the wireless in your home, like I've done, like Dr. Havas, like Laurie, our co-host, has done, and just start replacing all your wireless connections with Ethernet cables and adapters, or start pulling those antennas right out of your stuff. And then when you are using a wireless device, keep it in airplane mode as often as you can and make sure that the Bluetooth and Wi-Fi antennas are also off, right? And then maybe a next step would be to pluck up the courage to have a tech Sabbath. So I'm going to thank my partner, Marianne Tierney, a registered nurse. She's a master of public health. She's been a longtime psych nurse, and she's also earned her building biology credentials as an EMR, electromagnetic radiation specialist. And she founded Safe Tech North Carolina. And she pulled together some resources on this tech Sabbath. So what, in most religious traditions, there is a day of rest, right? We're all supposed to take a day of rest. So let's start talking to our loved ones and tell them why we think we want to propose that we as a family do this, and then brainstorm together. What can we do? What's reasonable? And then come up with a plan of really meaningful things to do. Let everybody choose something. Go on a hike, play games together, do a craft project, or just sit down and read a good book, And also plan the food so that you're not having to pull up your device to get recipes on your Sabbath. But plan something yummy that everybody would love to eat, and then be prepared. make a box where everyone's going to put their tech, and we're not going to go near it. We're going to turn it all off. Confirm with everybody what the plans are, and then let everybody around you who might be looking for you, let them know what you're doing so that they can have the grace to give you the space to enjoy your Sabbath. Write down your emergency contacts, so if anything comes up, you can just go right to it. You don't need your technology for it. If you're going somewhere, print out your directions, right? Take them with you. Check out menus in advance if you're going to be going to a place that you want to order from. Gather up all your supplies and maybe take books out of the library. Do some reading together, or read on a subject that you've been wanting to do but kind of got sucked down the rabbit hole on your phone and never quite got there. And again, be prepared with food. So Mary Ann shared this quote from Roy Hessel, who was the CEO of iBuyDirect.com, saying, "You need to approach this as a blackout period with unwavering belief in its benefit and a commitment to see it through. The key is to be unapologetic rather than aspirational or just aspiring to unplug. Unapologetically unplug." He says, "There is nothing, with the exception of a life and death situation, that would cause me to compromise that precious time. As far as business and my income are concerned, they can wait." So we're kind of regathering our sanity here. And there are some other excellent books here on doing a Sabbath if you're interested. So here's some additional practices and resources as we wind down. My colleague, Dr. Carrie Crofton up in Canada, is re-releasing her book called Less Screen, More Green, and it's another wonderful resource for us all. Our friends at the Environmental Health Trust have created so many incredible fact sheets, like what parents need to know. They have other ones to give to your healthcare teams. They have translated into certain other languages as well. But they've got a lot of great printables there. And then the Phone-Free Schools movement and Screen Strong and others, these are parents perhaps who have lost children because of these harms from social media. I spoke to one of the leaders and I said, "So how did you decide to take action?" She said, "Well, my little girl, her toddler," she said, "my little girl and I were going to do some activity. And the little girl took off and went and got the mom's cell phone and said, 'Here, Mom, you didn't have your cell phone with you.'" And the mom went, "Holy smokes, that's what I've been modeling for my child? That I can't do anything without my cell phone?" So that was her wake-up call. And another one of the moms' child committed suicide because of all of the excessive screen time, bad things that happen. So they have wonderful toolkits for administrators and for parents that we can all use. And we're just now starting the conversation with them about the microwave radiation that needs to be addressed. And here are our friends at the Building Biology Institute, where you can hire a consultant to come help you to measure, do a report of what's going on, and then teach you how to mitigate or help you line up experts like electricians that can come in and help you get it done. And then when I was talking about that wireless headset, I ordered mine at a company called LessEMF.com. There's also one called Tech Wellness. There's Shield Your Body that are credible groups. And Safe Living Technologies is where I got my meter from. And they are also very highly certified, and everything goes out for third-party certification. All their equipment is calibrated, and they also offer some of the shielding products as well. So those are solutions for you, and we thank you for staying with us for our 2-hour webinar here. And we're gonna still, if folks want to stay on for an extra few minutes, we can stop the screen share, but feel free to reach out to us at my website, register at our webinars, reach out directly by email to me or to Laurie, and feel free to try out our little course at Safer Tech Education. We're actually going to be rebranding that for next month. We hit a glitch with somebody else who had a Safer Tech trademark. So we're going to be calling ourselves Safer Screen Time, I think, but we'll know more next month. So I'll stop the screen share and I will bring Laurie back in to our spotlight and ask if she can unmute and let us know if there were any questions that we should answer in our chat today.
There are some questions, not too many, but there are a few. So I'll start, I guess, at the top.
Okay.
Okay. Somebody had asked for the link to the medical conference, so it's in there. Magda has talked, or you talked about a resource for laying out a plan for cell phone use in a family. We wondered where we could find that.
So I'm going to send out my slides tomorrow along with the recording, and you'll be able to click right through to everything we spoke about today.
Okay, so there was a link for that document.
Yeah, with the American Academy of Pediatrics.
Okay, great. Okay. And link to the mat that Magna talked about, but then she wrote in here about a movie that in which they mention it, but I wonder if there's a link to the PEMF mats. We didn't have a chance to see the movie, but wanted to just look into those mats.
Yeah, I don't have a link to that. But if Dr. Havas is able to drop something into the chat, that would be helpful. Otherwise, I think you can reach out to Dr. Havas through her Global EMF Monitoring Program. So if you go out to Global EMF Monitoring, you'll be able to connect with Dr. Havas there.
Okay.
Okay.
All right. The next thing, somebody asked the question, will the metal container help in my own foyer and have all visitors dump their phones into a metal trash bin?
I think that's brilliant. I walked into a friend's house who doesn't allow any radiation into her home, and she had just taken an old paint can and she put her own label around it that said cell phones, please, and wearables, whatever else people have. And that's her expectation. You come into my house, you drop your stuff. You're welcome to forward your phone calls to my landline. And that's it. Yeah. And then measure, make sure. Yeah. Barb Payne, thank you. It does need to be a sealable container. You need to have a lid on that thing. Otherwise, the radiation just goes out like a pebble in a pond.
And I bet people are wondering, how do you forward your cell phone calls to your landline?
So all you have to do is go in the settings of your phone. And I know on the iPhone, it just says phone. So you click on that and there's a call forward option right there.
That's all
Yeah,
it is.
pretty
Okay.
sleek, huh?
Okay. Magda had written that this documentary called Tesla's Medicine is now airing on Tubi for free, and it mentions several PEMF mats from various countries. I had a question about a VPN, which is
Virtual private network.
yes, I just got installed. I just had my phone checked. They look at your laptop for free of Staples, and I got new protection software on it that has a VPN. And I was told it wasn't an antenna, but I feel when I'm using it, it's problematic. And when I shut it off, it's better. And then it seems to go back on by itself. So do you know if it's an antenna?
That's beyond my scope.
My understanding was it keeps things encrypted so nobody could take data from my phone.
Which is good. You know what I do? I'd reach out to Ken Gartner, who's a building
Okay.
biologist here in Massachusetts, and I bet Ken might know an answer for you. He's pretty smart. He's an engineer too, and a building biologist, so that's probably more up his alley.
Okay, and Magda did write, she wrote in the, if you, before the end, if you remind us how to save the chat, she
Mhm.
wrote about the PEMF mats.
Excellent. Thank you, Magda. So for anybody who would like to save the chat, down at the bottom of your chat window,
Now
there
at the top.
is usually,
See the three dots at the top, right next to the chat?
yeah, okay, the Zoom updated.
Moved it.
Look for those three little dots, the ellipse, and click on that, and it will give you the option to save your chat.
And that was the
And
last
it'll save it in the
question.
Zoom folder on your computer.
So right where it says meeting chat and right below the title is Safer Tech Possibilities in Schools, Free Public Education, see those little 3 dots? Peggy's not seeing them.
Yes, down at the very bottom of the chat.
Oh,
Whoop.
see, mine's not at the
Oh,
bottom, mine's at the top.
where did they go? Yeah, they did move it to the top.
Yeah, it's right there next to
Yeah,
the title of the,
on more, there it is.
yeah.
So it'll just say save chat and you just click on that. Okay. All right. Were there any more questions in the chat, Laurie?
No, I don't know if anybody might have something that
Okay.
they.
Well, we can go ahead and let anybody raise their hand if they would like to ask any questions live. And Laurie, I want to thank you so much for being my co-host tonight. It's just really hard to run one of these things when you're also presenting, and I so appreciate your time and your efforts and everything that you're doing in your town and for our world in general, and mostly for your friendship. That's one of the best things about doing this work is I've met some of the nicest people, and Laurie and Magda and Barb and, Ave and Marlene, so many great people on this call tonight that are taking this serious and making efforts in their communities. And here we have Shelley Wright of Canadian Educators for Safe Technology. Shelley, go ahead.
Yeah, I
And
just, oh, sorry.
okay, go ahead.
I just put something in the chat, but it was a little late, and I hope people picked it up. I just wanted to say thank you for your thorough presentation filled with valuable resources and practical tips for families and schools. Taking small, manageable steps those steps are essential, allowing people to feel confident in adopting digital wellness and practices at home and gradually introducing RF reduced strategies into schools. So I just want people to hear that before they dash. You have done an amazing job. So I echo the words as well that Dr. Magda Havas shared with us this evening. I'm just so thrilled to be a part of the Champions team and to hopefully bring safe tech into our local communities. So thank you for everything you are doing.
Right back at you, Shelley. So Shelley has done a lot of what we've done here too, as you go all the way up the chain of command, thinking that people will take this as seriously as it needs to be taken. And then it falls on deaf ears because we have so many conflicts of interest. So I'm just tickled that Shelley is joining our Safer Tech Schools pilot project. And we'll come back to grassroots with us and see what we can do, because for 10 years, we've been waiting for someone else to fix it, and they're just not coming, or certainly not coming fast enough. So I see that
Isn't it?
question about, is there an option to safely use the internet? I don't know enough about that yet. I'm thinking that some shielding and hardwiring would need to be done. But I don't know, Magda, do you know anything more about that if you're still on with us?
My understanding is that the radiation from satellites is much lower than it is from a nearby cell tower. So I would be less concerned about internet access through satellites. But once again, if you have a meter, you can measure it, and that's the best. That's what I would recommend to everyone. Just measure it and see what the levels are.
Excellent. And as always, shut everything off when you're not using it. No sense in your device over there trying to make a handshake with that satellite if you don't need it, I guess. Thank you, Magda. Sherry, go ahead and unmute.
Hi, everyone, and it's so good to see everybody here. So I wanted to ask you, in your opinion, while we are, I'm speaking to the folks in the schools and introducing like the safe technology for hardwiring and things like that, and bringing in the frequencies that they're getting from the very close by 300-foot towers. So the kids here, obviously, like most children, got the Chromebooks. So they're on every desk, the routers, the smart TVs and stuff. But in my area, most of our schools are also either directly under a tower or within. I've done readings for all. They're all being bombarded with extreme levels of RF radiation. So I'm marrying the two together, but overwhelming them with the information, I think, could be a possibility when they're trying to hardwire and they're dealing with the radiation from the towers.
Yeah, I know it is. It's very hard. And Sherry, you know, I so appreciate that you are very diplomatic and you've worked some wonderful relationships with the folks in your schools and your legislature. I would strongly encourage you to be building out at the grassroots level, because the public getting engaged is about the only thing that has ever made for meaningful change. And especially where an existing cell tower is concerned, that literally is about the only thing that has ever gotten a cell tower taken down. There out in Ripon, California, was a Sprint cell tower on the campus, and children were getting these unbelievable brain tumors. Teachers were getting breast cancers. People in the community were getting cancers. And it wasn't until the public really spoke up in volume that Sprint finally moved that tower. So until you get your local families engaged, I don't know that you will have great success. So that's why we're excited to have you as one of the 10 members of our pilot program to do that build out of the grassroots, because people change in positions of authority. You might get some really great contacts and then they're gone the next year, and then you're stuck back at square one.
Correct.
So it's
Yes.
critically
Okay.
important to keep working with the families, with the grandparents, and with every organization in your town that cares about the environment and our children. You know, all the civic clubs, the sustainability group. That's what we need to activate, I think, before we're going to see any meaningful action from our schools.
That sounds great. That's what I'm doing. Building out, you know, kind of getting them the information where it kind of coexists together and helping them understand all that good stuff. So thank you very much. I just wanted to ask, you know, kind of see what you thought about that. So that's what I'm
Yeah,
doing.
it's contractual. I mean, they're getting a revenue stream from those cell towers, and there's a contract that probably goes 25 years or so. So a
Yeah.
contract is going to have to be broken, and that is very unlikely to happen until there's enough public outcry for safety.
Okay, we are working on the village. Thank you so much.
Right on.
It's great to be a
Uh,
part of this. It's wonderful. Thank you, Hen.
You are so welcome. We're so honored to have you. All right, any last questions before we say goodnight here? Okay, everybody. Well, listen, thank you again for giving us your time. Feel free to come back for additional webinars every month. We'll post our January ones in a couple of weeks. And feel free to share the recording and my slides that we'll send out tomorrow. And I want to wish you all a tech-safe day and very happy, safe holidays. Unplug and get out there and just do what will unwind the craziness of the holidays. Get back out in nature, spend time with your loved ones, and give yourself a break. All right, everybody. Take care. Laurie, again, thank you so much for being here with us tonight.
It was great. I learned lots. I'm happy to join.
Okay. Take care, everybody.